morning. Today is Tuesday, September 13th. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's at the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearings. There are 5 cases on the agenda today. The first case is RPC 17002-004 at 1655 Fort Myer Drive. I understand the appellate wants to withdraw this case. Okay, is there any objection from the county? Mr.
No.
Okay, all right, I will move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Okay, we have a second by Mr. Matzkin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it is unanimous. That case is withdrawn. Okay, the second case on the agenda is RPC 1700720 at 1500 Wilson Boulevard. I assume, Mr. Harmon, you are speaking on behalf of the appellant, so you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. Madam Chairwoman, members of the board, members of the county, good morning. 1500 Wilson Boulevard is a 261,000 square foot building in Roslyn. It is 51 years old, and this is the building I'm sure you're all familiar with. It includes the Target and the Starbucks. It's right as you're going up the hill from Roslyn. It's right where Wilson and Clarendon split when you're going up the hill. It's that black building that sits atop the Target. To begin, this property, again, is 51 years old and is not competitive in today's market, as evidenced by the historical vacancy issues. Since at least 2015, the property has been over 50% vacant. In 2015 and 16, it was 77 and 76% vacant, respectively. Then from 2017 through 2019, it was 67% vacant. Occupancy increased briefly in 2020 due to a new tenant, who then gave back most of their space at the end of 2021. Vacancy was still 53%. As of the date of value, the property was 56% vacant. This property was a former GSA building. It's largely in the condition that other former GSA properties are after long-term leases. It is outdated and uncompetitive. Why has this property struggled with high vacancy over the past decade? To start, it's in need of some serious TLC. Most of the property is in the original condition from when it was built in 1971, 51 years ago. Only the top 3 floors have been upgraded since then. Amenities at the building are absent. The building has no fitness center, no conference center, which is practically unheard of for an office building in the RB corridor. The restrooms need to be modernized. The property uses self-contained units for air conditioning, and these units are at the end of their useful life and need to be replaced. The HVAC system also needs to be replaced. The electrical system needs major upgrades. The garage needs major upgrades and maintenance. The property has environmental issues that need to be addressed. You can see a full list of the deferred maintenance items on page 59 of the appeal. These are the reasons the property has not been able to reach stabilized occupancy over the past 7 years. The cost of completing the deferred maintenance and making the property competitive would be considered by a purchaser as of the date of value, and such costs should be deducted below the line, as we have done on column G of the DREA summary page. This is consistent with Virginia law. In Arlington County v. Ginsburg, the Supreme Court of Virginia stated that if market rents are imputed, the cost to achieve those market rents must also be imputed. This is the situation we find ourselves in at this property. Alternatively, these costs could be accounted for by increasing the tenant improvement allowance. Also on the DREA test column on the summary page, you will note that the county has imputed vacant office space at the same rate as occupied office space on rows 1 and 1B of column F. This is simply not realistic. 83% of the in-place office leases were signed pre-pandemic, with the majority of them being 5 years prior to the date of value. The market as of January 1, 2022 is not the same as it once was. Rents have decreased and concessions have increased. The county initially imputed $35.50 per square foot to the vacant office space. This is a more realistic value to use given the state of the building and the historical vacancy issues that have plagued it over the past decade. The assessed rate of $42.15 is also well above what the county has assessed for similar properties. At 1616 North Fort Myer, vacant office space was imputed at $35 per square foot. At 1501 Wilson, it was $37. And at 1515 Wilson, it was $37.67. As such, $35.50 is more indicative of the market rate for the vacant office space at this property. Finally, the operating expense rate that the county applies in the test column decreased by 9% from the initial assessment. We need to account for the fact that the property was 56% vacant as of the date of value. We've imputed income as if this property was only 25% vacant. The exercise of increasing income due to a hypothetical additional 30% of the building being occupied must be accompanied by increasing the operating expenses that additional 30% tenancy will consume. These are two sides of the same coin. You can't impute income as if occupied without also imputing expenses as if occupied. We can create an estimate of what the increased operating expenses will be. If we look to the variable cost per occupied square foot in 2021, we see that utilities were $2.56 per occupied square foot. Janitorial was $1.28 per occupied square foot. And the management fee was $1.38 per occupied square foot. Increasing the variable expenses to account for the increased occupancy supports operating expenses at $11. This is in line with the 2020, 2021, and 2022 initial assessment for this property. Even at $11 for operating expenses, this would be low for the submarket. Comparable properties were assessed with much higher operating expenses. The same properties that I cited for the vacant office space rental rate apply here. 1616 Fort Myer had $12 operating expenses imputed on the assessment. 1501 Wilson had $12.50 per square foot, and 1515 Wilson had $11.62 in operating expenses. Finally, this property has been advertised for lease for over 10 years and still has not reached stabilized occupancy. A 1-year deduction for lease-up is simply not realistic at this property. 2 years minimum should be applied to the rent loss. Absent increasing the free rent allowance, the vacant office rental rate should be reduced to reflect the distressed state of the property. To recap, the assessment imputes the in-place leased rate for vacant office income, which is unlikely to be achieved given today's market. The assessment understates the operating expenses required to operate the property at stabilized occupancy, and the assessment does not account for the significant deferred maintenance that will be required to make the property competitive. As such, the taxpayer respectfully requests that the assessment be reduced as set forth in the appeal. Thank you. And Eileen, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I do not. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, good morning. For this property, as Mr. Harmon pointed out, our main difference is the rates for the vacant space. And I'd like to ask the board to turn to the CoStar report that kind of states all the square feet that is vacant for the property. I try to include this with every case. For instance, in this case, we have a few spec suites on the 6th floor, suite 600, 620, 640, and that tends to rent for a higher rent than the other spaces. When we look at what's being offered in the property on page 7 and page 8 of 133, you see that all the rents are listed there. For instance, on the 14th floor, 14,378 square feet is available for $46 per square foot. We have what appears to be lease comps of August of this year for 11,766 square feet on the 16th floor for $54. And on the 17th floor, 9,052 square feet for $54 as well. Keep in mind that in our test, we used the $42.15, same as what we saw on the leases in place. And we feel that is a reasonable estimate given what we see here, and that's listed here in CoStar as well. When we look at the yearly assessments, Mr. Harmon pointed out that we did offer $11 initially and in previous years as well. But if you look at this property and you see what the expenses have been provided in years 18 to 21, we have at $7 at best, $5 for the most current year, 2021, and we're offering $10 in our assessment test column F. So we believe $10 is reasonable as well. I don't think we differ with the excess vacancy below the line. As we all know, it's a yearly assessment, so we assess any vacancy, any excess vacancy every year, and we've done so should this property continue to have vacancy issues. I think I have anything else. With that, we're open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, questions from board members? Mr. Metzgen.
Excuse me, I have two for the department. First one is the rents out of CoStar. Those are fairly current advertised rents and not on or about January 1st, 2022. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So when you got the appeal in April, I guess you didn't have a chance to look at them closer to the date evaluation, but only now that you're preparing for today, right?
Correct.
Okay, good. They probably haven't changed, but the closest we can get to the first day of the year, the better. The other question, Mr. Harmon, you may need to help me on this with my question for the department. Mr. Harmon, the appellant's case was, well, if you impute current gross potential rents, you also got to impute current, I think it's capital cost needs in order to achieve those rents. Am I paraphrasing you right, Mr. Harmon?
There's
Okay.
substantial deferred maintenance at the property as listed on page 59 of the appeal that will be required to reach stabilized occupancy. Yes.
Right, in order to upgrade it enough to achieve the $45 or so a square foot rents.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, great. What's the department's feel on that? Because we talked last week and week before about plussing up and how difficult it is to plus up operating expenses because of significant vacancy. What about this plussing up, considerable capital cost needs?
Well, I mean, if you compare what they're reporting to what we're actually testing, like I said, that they're at best $7 a square foot. We're at $10 a square foot. And then along with that, the asking rents compared to what we're testing is a significant amount as well.
Okay, so you're offsetting operating expenses.
Offsetting, yes.
Okay, last question, sorry. And that quickly went out of my mind. Oh, what about is the percentages, best you know, of this spec suite upgraded office space versus the balance of the vacant office spaces that are 30, 40 years old and untouched?
Mr. Metzgen, I can address that point.
Great.
As of January 1, there were no spec spaces built out, and they're in the process of hoping to deliver some spec spaces. The only space at the building that has been upgraded was the tenant, and Jordan, remind me of the name of that tenant, but that had leased the top 3 floors and then went out of the top 2 floors. And those top 2 floors got new window lines, were completely gutted and redone. The rest of the space as of January 1 were 20 on 20 columns and predominantly were in shell condition, the space that was not leased.
And so the tenant block 1 signed a lease at the end of 2020, or signed a lease in 2019, took possession at the end of 2020 of the top 3 floors, 15, 16, and 17. At the end of 2021, they vacated 16 and 17. And 17 was released in July of 22. I don't have information on what CoStar is reporting, but this July 22 lease I do have, and it is nowhere near the rate that CoStar has. This lease for the 17th floor has a net effective rental rate of $36.82.
So, but the bottom line is here on 1122, there were no spec suites, built out improved spec suites available. Since then, the landlord has spent some money and has leased some of them up, right?
No, that's incorrect. So the spec suites, as of January 1, there were none. The space that Jordan was just referencing is the space that Block 1 vacated. That is a top floor of the building and was built out very, very nicely for Block 1. And that is the space that was leased at $36 and something cents.
But that was before.
That space was brand new as of the end of 2020. So the top, let me just summarize. So the top 3 floors were completely gutted, rebuilt. The top 2 got new window lines, floor to ceiling windows. And those top 2 floors were leased along with the 15th floor to Block 1. Block 1 vacated 16 and 17 after occupying it for only 1 year. The Block 1 space was released to this other tenant at $36. What was the rate, Jordan?
$36.82.
Okay, great.
So that's the equivalent, Mr. Matskin, of a really, really, really nice spec suite. It's built out to a much higher grade than a standard spec suite.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Yates.
To the appellant, there was reference to a lot of the vacant space being the equivalent of shell space. So is that 57%, and how much of that is shell or just available to rent right now as is?
Almost all of it is shell. Let me just get to it. I believe everything that is not leased, with the exception of the top 3 floors, is shell space. There are no spec suites as of January 1.
Yeah.
And by shell, I mean 20 on 20 columns, cement, what you would consider to be, when you walk in, it's see-through shell space.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, if this is for the owner, when was this property bought by the current owner?
This was it's interesting. So Penzance bought this property when GSA left it. Penzance turned it over to a lender, and the note was purchased by the current owner. And I don't have the consideration. I know it is recorded at the assessment. You know how that goes. If you buy a property for less than the assessment, you get recorded at the assessed value during that time period. And that is what the situation is. I did speak with the attorney who handled the transaction on behalf of the party that had taken the property back, and was unable to obtain details despite reaching out to that person.
Okay, any final questions? No? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. For this property, the most recent lease was the Block 1 lease in 2020. And we saw that leased for the amount shown on the rent roll. I believe it was 56. Give me 1 second, sorry. It was $55.93 for the 16th and 17th floor. That was actually a 20 2020 lease. And then on the 15th floor, it's $47.21, with that period ending, or that lease ending in 2028. CoStar does show spec suites on the 6th floor, 600, 620, and 640, as I pointed out on page 7 of 133. Even if you were to consider increasing expenses beyond what the county believes is reasonable at $10 a square foot, let's say the $11 that the appellant is suggesting, if you normalize that expense over the 5 years, you're still coming up with an average of 1.9 million. And again, the county is giving 2.5 million. Thank you. And we're also just confirming the original assessment, which had the rent at $35.50 for the vacant space that was in question, and the deductions below the line as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So the county mentioned that the operating expense rate is generous based on 2018 and 2019, I believe, were the years cited. Keep in mind the property was 67% vacant in those years when it spent $7 a square foot. We're imputing income as if it's only going to be 25% vacant. So if we look back to 2018, 2019 at 67% vacant, we're assuming 42% more occupancy than was achieved at those dates when they had $7 in operating expenses. $11 is what's accurate for this property. It's what's in line with neighboring properties that have been assessed. Additionally, the substantial upgrades and deferred maintenance that are mentioned on page 59 of the appeal, these need to be taken into account by any purchaser as of the date of value. These are repairs that need to happen to the garage. There's environmental issues. There's bathroom modernization that needs to happen before they can achieve any of these rents imputed. Thank you.
I'd just like to add, the devil is in the details. CoStar shows planned spec suites, which were scheduled to hopefully deliver in August of 2022, that Mr. Peralta referenced as being complete. So just wanted to make sure that was clear. I also want to point out, as Mr. Harmon had previously, that GSA was in tenancy, and GSA absorbs a lot of their own expenses, such as security, char, etc. So
Okay.
That's not really indicative of operating a multi-tenanted building either.
All right, thank you both. Okay, it's just among the board. What's everybody think on this?
Okay.
Mr. Mapkin.
Make sure this guy's not sleeping. I did a lot of work on the test case because my first note was, when I read this the other day, the test case was came up with a conclusion of an unusually high relative to the original assessment. And I worked all kinds of numbers and I drove myself crazy. And then I realized, after listening to both parties here, that the original assessment, column D, is actually quite good and quite on. They agree on the operating expenses. They agree on the value of vacant offices. In discussion, yeah, maybe there's some spec suites now, but that's all after the date evaluation, just doesn't matter. Maybe one wonderful suite up in the top is leased for a very, relatively speaking, high amount of money per square foot, but that's unique to the building. This $44+ stuff for a building that is tired and old, although in a great location, is just not realistic. So I keep coming back again to column D. I like it a lot and I support it.
Okay, Mr. Yates.
I liked D too, after trying to compare some things going back and forth. But I'm open for the TI number. I think, with 57% of it vacant and 50% of it available in shell condition, it's $70 is low. It has a history of vacancy that's just, they're not going to lease this stuff that well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen. They were 67% vacant
What's your idea of what, instead of $70, does that say 70?
Yeah, at least the 90, which we're doing on other cases, but they have the 110 in there, and the county used 110 in their test.
So what do you recommend, 90, 100?
I did the test on 110 also.
Okay,
Because that was the only thing that.
110 makes sense, so that's.
The original arguments from the appellant are that the rates that they used were high, but when we're looking at the original assessment, they are what the appellant is requesting. The only thing that, yeah, I thought maybe spaces like that in Shell is strange, but
Did you run the 110 on the D column?
Yeah,
yes. Using the 110,
$40 times how many, 32,000?
it comes to 60,354,200, which is a little bit lower than if we use the appellant's numbers, except deducting the capital improvements that they're requesting, and also 1 year only on the allowance. So if we.
So you adjusted G, you adjusted column G?
Well, I compare to that, if we do G, deducting the capital improvements, I'm only using 1 year instead of 2, their number comes higher than the number I'm coming up with.
I'm okay, I think D was much closer to the target with some exceptions.
Right.
And this building is not going up in value.
Right.
And I think that's wrong to do that.
So you took D and plus it up by $40 square foot times the vacant number. Yeah, I like that.
I do too.
Okay, so just to clarify, and a couple of things. One, you have to be recognized so that they can determine who's talking on the screen. So there was a lot of discussion back and forth. So Mr. Penaranda, just to clarify, you used column D and then you upped the tenant improvements to 110 per square foot?
Yes.
Okay. And that was 60,354,200?
60,354,200.
Okay. All right. So are folks okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Mr. Penaranda, do you want to make a motion then?
Okay, I'll move we reduce the assessment to 60,354,200 by increasing the TI on the original assessment to $110.
Okay. And do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Yates is the second. All in favor? Aye. Okay, it's unanimous. It is reduced to 60,354,200 based on the column D assessment and increasing the TI to $110 a square foot. Thank you. Okay. Next on the agenda is RPC 3402021 at 251 18th Street South. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. 251 18th Street. This is just east of Richmond Highway in Crystal City. The issues on appeal are the office and retail rental rates and the pass-through income. The DREA summary sheet is on page 4 of the appeal. I'd like to start with the in-place and vacant office rental rates. If you'd be so kind as to direct your attention to comment 1 at the bottom of the summary sheet, you'll see that the county states the office leases average $41.56 per square foot. We agree with this statement, and you can see that on the county's rent roll on page 6 of the appeal. In-place leases are at $41.56 per square foot. If we take the standard 6% concession rate that the county applies to in-place leases on other properties, we arrive at a leased office rental rate of $39.06, which you can see is what the taxpayer has used on the appellant pro forma column in column G on row 1. However, if we take a look at what the assessment imputes in the test column F, we see that the county uses $40 per square foot for both in-place and vacant office. This is not uniform with the concessions methodology applied to other office properties in the county, where taxpayers are afforded 6% concessions to the in-place rental rate. This is a prime example where the law of uniformity is to be applied to protect the taxpayer from an assessment that treats the taxpayer differently to the taxpayer's detriment than its neighbors. This appears to be an error, and as we have presented in prior hearings this year, lease concessions have been well in excess of 6%. This is supported by the most recent leasing activity at this property, which required 9% concessions. This info was provided to the county, as you can see on page 39 of the appeal. Additionally, as we have also provided evidence of in prior hearings, market rental rates have dropped over the past several years. New leases are not going to command the same rates as in-place leases. As such, the vacant office rental rate should be below the in-place rental rate. Next, for the retail rent, I'd like to again address comment 1 on the summary page to start. This comment states that retail leases average $39.52 per square foot, or $49 once tenants who are paying low rental rates are removed from the equation. This is incorrect for several reasons. Looking at the 2021 I&E rent roll, the average retail rental rate is $37.57 per square foot. Once we add the rents for the 1,020 square feet that were not included on the rent roll, this figure becomes $38.08 per square foot. If you look to the county's rent roll on page 6, you will see a retail tenant named Health and Relaxation. The county requested information regarding this tenant's rental rate, which we provided. The initial 2021 I&E rent roll had no rent listed. The county requested what that rental rate was. We provided that. It's a percent rent agreement that paid $7.92 per square foot over the past year. The county disregarded the actual income received from this tenant and instead imputed rent at $38.79. You'll notice that on the summary page that by imputing rent on this tenant, the county has not only overstated the income potential, but double counted the income from the tenant. Rent for this tenant is included in both the leased retail income on row 2 and on the retail percentage income listed on row 7 of the test column. As to the county's next contention that tenants paying low rental rates should be excluded from the equation, I'd like to point out 2 facts. The retail space in this area is unlike any other in the county. It is mainly underground. There is no visibility from the street or the sidewalk. The positioning of the retail is extremely poor, which is why some of the tenants are paying low rental rates. In fact, 26% of the occupied retail space is paying low rental rates. This is not some aberration that should be excluded as not indicative of the health of the retail space. Rather, it is evidence of the difficult positioning of the retail and the market rate the owner is able to achieve. The property also has a subset of tenants paying exceptionally high rental rates. The county did not exclude these tenants from its calculation as being outliers. Therefore, we must evaluate the retail space in its entirety with an average leased rate of $38.08 per square foot, which when discounted by 6% for concessions, results in a retail rental rate of $35.80 per square foot. This rate should be discounted for the vacant retail to reflect the difficulty surrounding the lease up of the space. Since the county has clearly not included all of the leased retail space to arrive at the income figures used on the assessment, the rates imputed do not accurately portray the state of the property. Again, most of this retail is underground. Limited access, limited visibility. The county's removed the rents that they believe are too low to be indicative, but they've kept in the ones that could rightly be considered too high to be indicative of the space. So to summarize, the assessment fails to account for concessions on the office rental rates and selectively chooses which retail leases to include in its analysis. The result is rental rates that are not supported by leases in place and a value that is above fair market. Thank you. And Eileen, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I do not. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, thank you. For this property, we did go through the rent roll for 2021. We did include those low rents that Mr. Harmon had pointed out. For Health and Relaxation, I noted that this rate, that $38.79, was the 2020 rate that was in the I&E that was included as part of the lease. When we looked at the other leases in place, the Dollar Shop, I highlighted the ones that I saw that were in kind of question. $4.51 for the space there. I Atia Kebab was $6.09. And then Albin Odolame was $10.03. I thought that these were low compared to what the other retail spaces were. As you see on the rent roll analysis, page 6 of 124, you can see all the retail spaces outlined there and exactly what they're receiving. Anywhere from, I believe, $38.25 or $22.80 for the cleaners to $116.82 for the sushi garden. And with those low rents, we were still at $39.52 for the average of all properties, including the highs and the lows, as Mr. Harmon pointed out. And we still tested at a lower average than what they are actually receiving for this property. Our revision did account for space that was vacant for the property, but I would like to add that the majority of that space, I believe CoStar, and it's in this packet, CoStar reports 54,405 square feet vacant, but of that 54,000, 52,489 is sublet space. So when looking at this property, we did account for 15% of vacancy, where the majority of that space is sublet space. The actual vacancy for the property as of the first of the year was less than 15%. We were at about 12%, which afforded about 10,855 square feet in excess vacancy allowed before capitalization. So when we look at this property, we also want to focus in on the historic NOI of this property. As you see in 2018, the NOI was 11 million, 2019, 11.5, 2020, 10 million, and then the most recent year, 9.2. The county in its revision column is at 9.1. So we feel that, you know, the rents in place, the rents used in the revision, the expenses used, expenses of $11 is higher than, well, it's not higher. It's similar to what the appellant is asking for. And again, the NOI is lower than what they reported in all previous 4 years. So we asked the board to take that in consideration. With that, we're open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? No? Oh, Mr. Metzgen.
I have one question about concessions for the department, excuse me. Sorry. You have no, in either your, what's it called? Revision or your original assessment column D, you don't have any dollars taken aside, deduction for concessions. Are they in the imputed potential rents? How are you handling that?
Let's see here. Yeah, the average that I have is 41.56 for the leases in place. So we are taking a deduction for that.
Down to well below 40. Okay, another question. The appellant alluded to 6% concessions here. It's about 9, which I'm sure is true. But I thought and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Harmon, that there's did you allude that there's a guideline of the 6% concessions? Because I've never heard that before, nor could I find it in the guidelines. Where did that 6% come from? I guess this is a question.
That's what the county has applied to other properties for concessions for in-place rental rates.
Just
we've seen
general, what you've seen.
Generally, yes. And we've seen on other properties it's been much higher recently, and we've argued for that. And then it comes back to the 6%.
And Mr. Matskin, the county has said on repeated occasions throughout this year that they are using 6%. And they have said that to use anything else would create a disuniform assessment. So in this case, where they're using less than 6%, they're straying from that very low bar or very low guideline or very low uniform concession amount.
It's informal. Yeah, well, he responded to that by saying that they deducted from the imputed rent, but I understand.
But if you do the math, Mr. Matskin, that's not correct. If you do the math and you look at the rental rates that Mr. Peralta states on it's page 4.
6.
Okay, page 6.
Yeah, if you go to
And you
page,
take 94% of that amount, you're at $39.06, not the amount that Mr. Peralta is using in the test column.
The actual
So
rent
it's just a
reported is,
mathematical function.
the actual rent reported in 2021 INE is higher, about 500,000 more than what we're using in our revision.
You also had GSA vacate 76,000 square feet of space, so I don't think that that's it's relevant. In the last case we had income that was at 3.5 million, yet the county used 6 million. I think we're looking forward using the principle of anticipation in the income approach to value.
Okay, other questions from board members? No? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Yes, thank you. In looking at the original assessment where we had this vacancy at 5%, I believe that's more accurate given what we found in CoStar, where the majority of the vacant space, which we initially accounted for, is sublet space. So we believe that, in looking at this, the revision should be closer to what the original assessment should be. We did make the revision. Based on that, again, the property is at 12% vacant. We're affording 15%. That's in excess of about almost 11,000 square feet for this property for what they're actually reporting. And of that, there's more sublet space versus, untenanted space and space that they're not receiving rent on. With that, we do see that we did make a revision, and we'll stick with the revision at 127, 64,600. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
yes, thank you. So a couple of points here. For vacancy, we've heard the county say that vacant space is actually sublet space according to CoStar. This becomes an issue of what source do we trust? Do we trust CoStar, or do we trust the 2021 INE that was signed and attested to by the owner of this property? The 2021 INE reports this space as vacant, not sublet, not earning income. If you look at the incomes that the county has listed on page 6 of the appeal, this takes me to my next point. You can see that the in-place office comes out to $41.56. Deduct 6% for concessions from that, it's $39.08 per square foot. The retail space that the county's relying on, they said themselves, they've imputed the 2020 income for health and relaxation. That rent is at $38.79. The actual 2021 rent for that tenant is $7 and some change. So they're building up based on using prior year's income that is not indicative of the current state of the health of this poorly positioned retail space. So the office rents do not correctly deduct concessions to account for even the slightest market indication.
Okay.
The rent roll relies on retail leases that are not indicative of what was in place. And the vacant space, we rely on what the owner provides, not on CoStar. CoStar is often wrong, as we have seen many times this year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's just among the board members. What do you think? Mr. Penaranda?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. I mean, when I looked at this, I thought the original assessment was fine for me. You know, all the numbers were in line. The GPI, the EGI, NOI is lower than, it's been historically. But, I know that Mr. Peralta goes through the numbers and goes back to revise everything. And he came up with a lower number to revise the system by allowing the extra vacancy. So, I'm okay with the revised assessment.
Okay. Other folks? Mr. Matzkin?
Very, very quickly, I was sympathetic to the appellant's case that the vacant office space ought to be valued less, but it's less than $1 a square foot, and this is mass appraisal, and I thought that was too close to call. I agree with the appellant that on 1/1/22 it was vacant, vacant's vacant. Somehow it got subleased from somebody sometime during the calendar year. It is interesting, given that it's who they subleasing from. If it was vacant, but it doesn't matter. It's after the date evaluation, so I end up in the same place for different reasons with the same.
Okay. Anything different from the other two? No?
No.
All right. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll go ahead and move that we reduce the assessment to the revised number of 127,064,600.
Okay, do we have a second? All right. Mr. Matzkin is a second. All in favor? Aye. Okay, it's unanimous, 5-0. The assessment's reduced to the county's revised number of 127,064,600. Thank you. Okay, moving along to the fourth case on the agenda, Economic Unit 160150030 at 1101 Wilson Boulevard. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. 1101 Wilson, this is a 33-year-old building in Roslyn. This is the building that has the dome that is both very noticeable and very difficult to tenant. The prior tenants for the dome were the Museum, which vacated in 2002, and Arlington County, which leased the space for the Artisphere Cultural Center for 5 years, paying only operating expenses before they left in 2015. The issues on appeal are the dome rental rate, the pass-through income, and the operating expenses. To start, I'd like to direct your attention to the NOI on the county summary page on page 5 of the appeal. NOI at the property has fallen significantly from 2019 to 2021. Next, I want to discuss the office and retail rental rates listed on the test column on the summary page. What the test column has done is manipulated how tenants are reported. On page 7 of the appeal, you'll see the county's rent roll. The retail portion lists a tenant, RGN Arlington, as occupying 45,000 square feet of space on the 6th, 8th, and 9th floors. This tenant is an office tenant, but by listing it as retail, the county makes it appear as if the in-place office rate is much higher than the vacant, which has the effect of making the vacant office rental rate seem reasonable. This is simply not correct. When the RGN space is added to the in-place office, as it should be, and discounted by 6% for concessions, the rate for in-place office is $41.45, not $47.64 as the test column shows. To clarify, you can take the county's retail rent in column F, add it to the county's office rent, and you'll see that what we have reported as office rent, because there is one retail tenant that was reported as office and we just included it as office. But if you add the county's in-place income for both office and retail together, you'll see that our value only disagrees by about $9,000. Yet the way the county has chosen to report this office tenant leasing 45,000 square feet as retail, this skews the test column and confuses the issue. The issue, again, our incomes differ by only $9,000. The issue is the vacant office square footage. You can see that the county's area for vacant office is 10,700 square feet larger than the taxpayer's figure in column G. This is the dome space. As I've previously stated, this dome has been leased to the museum until they left in 2002, and later Arlington County, but has sat vacant since the county vacated in 2015. The dome has been marketed since 2015 with no leasing activity, yet the assessment includes the dome as vacant office space, with income imputed at $41 per square foot. This is clearly in excess of what the dome, if an interested tenant even exists, could lease for. The dome has been vacant for 7 years. The space is not suitable for most users, yet the county has imputed income as if the space is suitable for office use at the office rate. In the current market, it is extremely ambitious to assume the dome will lease up with any tenant, and it is simply unbelievable to assume an office tenant will lease the dome space at the rate for office space. The dome produces no income. It is functionally and economically obsolete. It wouldn't be built today, and if anything, it is a cost burden and should be demolished. As such, the vacant office space square footage listed on row 2 of the DREA test in column F should be reduced by the area of the dome. The new vacant office space should total 117,700 square feet, which reduces vacant office income by $439,000. In the alternative, rent on the dome space should not be imputed above what the prior tenant was paying, which is the operating expenses alone on the space. Next, you'll notice that on row 3 of the test column, the county has adopted the property's actual 2021 parking income, which is generally the methodology that the county applies. However, on rows 4A and 6, the county does not follow their methodology concerning pass-through and miscellaneous income. The net result of pass-through and miscellaneous income being overreported is that the DREA test imputes nearly $220,000 more in income than the 2021 reported figures support. Pass-through income was higher in 2020 due to BAE paying high pass-throughs on space they had leased since 2008. BAE left at the end of 2020, and there is no reason to expect pass-through income to be anywhere close to that high watermark as the assessment has assumed. Next, we turn our attention to the operating expenses. First, a quick note about the per square foot figures shown on the summary page. Here again, the DREA columns use total NLA less storage space to come up with that operating expense per square foot figure. The other columns do not deduct storage, so the per square foot figures are not an apples to apples comparison. On the summary page, you can see on row 18 that the county initially applied operating expenses at $11.75 per square foot, then reduced it to $10.25 on the test column. $11.50 in operating expenses is appropriate for this building given its age, location, vacancy issues, historical operating expenses, and the effects of inflation. Operating expenses over the prior 4 years were $10.40, $9.84, $10.50, $10 even. All of this was while the property was not at stabilized occupancy. Also keep in mind, the 2020 and 2021 rates were driven significantly lower due to work from home policies, which limited in-person occupancy, thereby lowering consumption of utilities, janitorial, other variable expenses, etc. As we have stated on prior cases, if we look at the vacant office space on the summary page, both the county and the appellant are hypothetically assuming income not earned on vacant space. If we gross up income, it follows that the hypothetical increase in occupancy will result in consumption of more resources and increased operating expenses. Growing only utilities, janitorial, and the management fee to reflect stabilized occupancy supports the appellant's operating expense rate of $11.50. It is a logical fallacy to believe that more space will be leased and produce income without a corresponding increase in expenses. We must grow expenses to account for stabilized occupancy. The assessment's expense rate is a simple average of the prior 2 years, which again were stricken by high vacancy and low utilization. Growing the prior 2-year average to account for stabilized occupancy, greater utilization, and inflation gets us to $11.50 per square foot. This is also supported by assessments at comparable properties in the submarket. 1616 Fort Myer was assessed at $12 per square foot operating expenses. 1501 Wilson had $12.50. 1515 Wilson had $11.62 per square foot. Finally, the below-the-line lease-up costs do not reflect the reality of the property. Absorption in Arlington County has been negative over the prior 2 years. Assuming the property will achieve stabilization in 1 year is ungrounded from reality. A minimum of 2 years should be used as the absorption period. To summarize, the discrepancy with the income achievable by this property is due to the dome space being assessed as vacant office at the county's vacant office rental rate. This isn't clear from the test column because the county chose to include 45,000 square feet of leased office as retail. Assessment also imputes operating expenses that are below what both the market and the submarket support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, thank you. For this property, we looked at the rent roll and we did find that I'm not understanding exactly what Mr. Harmon is saying as far as the dome space, because I believe they included as part of office as well, if I'm not mistaken. Just totaling up their square foot that they imputed for office and vacant office. And they include fitness center and other space as well. For the revision, we did look at the leases in place, and we did find that the average for office leases is $50.69 per square foot, and the other rents that we did point out were significantly less than what we found in comparing the other office spaces. So we did exclude those from the calculation, but we've done this in the past for other rent that when comparing to the other office space, we didn't feel it was comparable to what they were receiving at other spaces. We did use their actual rent. If you look on my page 6 of 129, you'll see that I imputed different rates for those spaces. Combine the RGN and the child center, which is retail. We did impute that at the lower rate. On page 108 of 129, RGN at one point was paying $49 per square foot. I understand they have some rent concessions of $630,000, but the rent that was being paid on page 108 of 129 was $49 a square foot. The Roslyn Center that we saw on page 107 of 129 had a lease of $37.31 for the space, and again for our test or revision column, we're at $27.95 for those two spaces. So we did account for whatever abatements or whatever reduction in rent for the 2021 rent roll and for the 2022 assessment. For the test, upon review, we did change that rental rate. So if you look at the rest of the vacant or the rest of the office space, again, we're at the average of $50.69 overall, to include rents that range from $39.57 upwards of $60.94. Again, the county in their test column is using $47.64 for the leases in place. We did look at the history of this property and relied on the history of this property to determine what the parking income would be. We used the parking overall in the 2021 INE. We did use what they reported there. With pass-throughs, we look at this property along with the other properties in the county, and with pass-throughs, we have the real estate taxes that are almost always paid by the tenants. And in looking at this history, we did include the negative amount that was reported in 2021, And if you smooth the past 4 years out, we come up with the figure that we used in the department's revision, column F, of 307,000. We've done that on previous cases. We will continue to do that on cases going forward because it gives a better indication of what this property can achieve based on the history of the property. When looking at the expenses overall, they average consistently $10 a square foot year over year, and we're slightly higher at to account for any excess in expenses that may occur given the current situation. When looking at the excess vacancy below the line, again, in our guidelines, we pointed out the reports that we received for TIs. On average, they were about $70 a square foot for first generation and about $63 for second generation properties. And in our test, we're using $90 a square foot. I think that is more than generous given what we've seen in the market and how we've assessed other properties in the county. In this situation, in this property, we're affording more than what we have, given what we saw with respect to this property. With that, I don't have anything else to say. We're open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, this is for Jordan. What's inside the dome? When I walk in there, what's in there? What's inside?
It's set up as an auditorium type setup. So it's, I don't know how the museum or Arlington County kind of organize themselves in that space, but my understanding, and Eileen, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that its current setup is as an auditorium type facility.
That's correct. It's an auditorium, and then there's some space around it, like a dressing room, a projection room, and that sort of thing. But there's very little. It's predominantly an auditorium. I think they used to be able to do I forget what it's called, but where you see the stars above you, a fake planetarium.
Let me ask you a couple follow-ups. Why doesn't the owner go ahead and raise it?
It would be very expensive to raise. There was actually a requirement that it be raised at some point in time when they were going to reroute the road there. And the cost of demoing that space is quite expensive. It basically serves as a landmark and part of Freedom Plaza, but it is not income generating. It's not leased out independently. It's I guess there's a hope that some other museum or somebody else is going to come along and rent it.
Let me follow up with the county. Rob, how long does something have to sit empty due to a physical issue before you write it off as being leasable?
I don't understand the question. Other properties.
It's been empty for 7 years due to a physical problem. Why do you keep saying it's rentable?
Well, the outside of today's arguments that the appellants have stated, they include that space as rentable space on their page 73 of 129. To sort of reposition today is kind of a little unfair for me to defend.
That's an incorrect statement. I'm sorry. That's not correct.
The total square foot that they report on page 73 of 129 is 336,841. If you look at that page and add up all the square feet, it's inclusive of the office income.
Well,
the problem with that statement, Mr. Peralta, is that we impute income on 117,000 square feet of vacant space. So we have accounted for the dome space as being non-leasable because we have not imputed income to that space. So it was included, as you correctly state on that page.
I'm going to yield to Mr. Yates.
No, I was just wondering, when you say auditorium, it's a sloping floor or is it a level across?
It's a round area, or maybe it's an ellipsis. It's sloping. It's like a standard old-fashioned movie theater,
It's not like you could
but
relay.
much steeper.
Yeah, okay.
It's not flat. You couldn't convert it to office.
Okay.
Well, you couldn't.
I mean, I guess you can
Mr.
convert
Matzkin?
anything. But
How big is the dome, that square footage? How many square feet?
10,000, go ahead, Jordan.
10,700 approximately.
Thank you. All right, it's smaller than I recall. For the department, your imputed, what do you call it, vacant office potential income from that 10,000 plus, is that at the same amount of dollars per square foot as the rest of the vacant office in the building?
We're using the same amount of square feet that the appellant is using. So if the dome is included in theirs, the dome is included in mine. If it's not included, then it's not included in either one. My page 6 of 129 breaks it down as far as what I felt, what I see is vacant office and the other 2 tenants on the property. For that dome space, if you look at my actual rent roll analysis, I don't even include a square footage on the miscellaneous space for a dome. So I don't understand why they think I'm including that as office space.
So
I can very easily explain that.
10, I do see
If you look at page-
10,413, correct.
let the department.
look at this-
So you do account for it. It's not.
I do account for it in the 128,409 of the vacant space. So when you add those numbers up, so the office at 143,859, again, I'm referring to my page 6 of 129. The total amount of square footage is 336,841. So we're at the same number. So to say that they don't include it as office space, I think is incorrect.
You can see that on the vacant office.
Mr. Matzkin, if you look at the department's test page, you can see that the taxpayer uses 117,000 square feet to calculate income attributable to vacant office. And you can see that the county attributes income on 128,000 square feet. So
Right.
that is, we do not impute income for the dome. The square footage is included in the overall square footage because it exists, but it is not income generating and has not done anything since 2002 other than for 5 years covering operating expenses.
But it's at $41 a square foot in column F, the revision. So it
That
seems
is correct.
they've kind of averaged down the $47.
Well, again, Mr. Matzkin, the $47 is incorrect.
That's-
And Mr. Peralta, it should be what the taxpayer has. Mr. Peralta has taken out RGM and put it in retail. RGM is Regis Office. And he also discussed that Regis Office used to pay a certain rent, or Regis Office went bankrupt and rejected their lease. A new lease was negotiated with the Reform Organization, and that rent represents market. And by Mr. Peralta tossing that rental rate out and not including it, he's misrepresenting what is actually at the property. So, it's a very misleading statement, and it's also misleading to include it as retail when in fact it is office space. And I have to say that this just makes me wonder if the same thing gets tossed in and tossed out when the county is working on its guidelines. Because we see, and the county has said time and time again through Mr. Peralta, that if something's too high or too low, they don't include it. Or really never too high, but if it's too low, they don't include it. And that's what happened here.
I didn't say that. I didn't state that at all.
It's a good question.
In the last case, it was included, both high and low, as I pointed out.
Okay, Mr. Matzkin.
On RGN space, I was going to get to that, so thank you. What is RGN? What do they do for a living?
Have you heard of, Regis offices, an office sharing place?
It's Regis. Oh,
It's Regis, yeah.
okay, great. And
So they declared bankruptcy, and then they rejected this lease. Then they renegotiated a new lease, and this is the new lease at the place, at the 20, Jordan, I don't know the number specifically, but I think it's about $27 per square foot. The other lease is history.
It's
okay,
2505.
and the revision is pegged at about $28 a square foot. So for the department, do you agree that Regis space, which is a sizable amount of square footage, is covered under the retail income, row 3A, 2A?
It's covered, it shows under retail, but if you look at my page 6, if you will, it's using $27.95 for the rent, whereas the appellant is using $40 per square foot for the rent of that space.
Yeah, you're pegging it much less.
Right.
One seems to be arguing for a higher amount of income, which.
So, no,
That is
that's
not correct, Mr. Matskin or Mr. Peralta. What,
the,
if you take the two numbers, the retail income and the office income on Mr. Peralta's statement, you get basically to the taxpayer's income. What our point is by separating them out, he makes it appear that the office income is at $47 a square foot, when in fact it's closer to $40 per square foot. And the reason that that's important is because then you look at the vacant office and you look above and you say, oh, well, the office rent is $47 per square foot, when in fact it's not, because the Regis space has been separated out and reported as retail. The actual office income.
Down the average. I get it.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I get it. To probably the $41 level-ish or something.
Okay.
It's actually to the level that's in the column G.
But you know what Regis does, you guys know?
Yeah.
Okay, other questions? No? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. Again, for the RGN space, we found that there was concessions given for this space, and on page 108 of 129, we pulled the those specific tenants based on what the rents were showing on the rent roll with respect to the other spaces in place. We've done this on other cases as well, and you'll see if some cases go before the board that the appellant actually does the same. And in their instance, in their average, they're including the child center as office space, which was significantly less per square foot than what the other office spaces have achieved and showing on the rent roll. The Roslyn Children's Center is at $37.31 per square foot. So when looking at this, we did find a revision for this property, and we asked the board to confirm the $96,793,800. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
yes, thank you. So you can see on page 5 on the summary page, main issue is this dome space being included in column F on the vacant office at $41 per square foot. Their total area for vacant office, the county's area, is 128,000. The appellant's area is 117,000. This is to account for the dome not producing income, especially not at the office rental rate. As for operating expenses, you can see that what the county's provided, $10, $10, $10, $10. Keep in mind, this property was not at stabilized occupancy during any of that time. It was also in limited usage in 2020 and 2021. To assume that operating expenses at stabilized occupancy and at market usage will only be $10.25, that's not accurate. $11.50 is more indicative of what this property will support. As for the Roslyn Children's Center, that is reported as office on the I&E. That's why we reported it as office as well. You can see the net result is a figure that the same as we reported. Thank you.
I'd just like to add, the county is very interested in talking about averages. That the actual average NOI over the last 4 years was $6,558,000. So you can adjust all the columns and numbers you want from expenses, income, etc. But that 6,558 is $800,000 lower than what is in the revision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to just board members, can whoever has their phone on, could you turn the phone off, please? Thank you. Okay, now it's just among the board members.
That's your timer.
There is your
That was a timer.
Oh,
Sounds,
that's the timer? Oh, good God. All right,
never mind.
go ahead. It's just among the board members. Mr. Lawson.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Sometimes I'm sitting at the county board waiting for my case, and this, the subject of this dome has come up, and the county doesn't know what in the heck to do with it. They really don't. They like it, they think it's neat, but, it's not making any money for the owner, and the owner keeps it there. So what I did is I took the square footage of the dome, used $40 a square foot, and so I lowered the income of the test column, or the revision column, and then I used the 110 for the build up rather than the 90, because that's what they used in the assessment. Where I ended up, Madam Chairman, was 89,223,000. And so I'll throw that out and see if anyone agrees with my thinking.
And I'm sorry, what was the final number?
89,223,000.
Okay. What's everybody think? Mr. Matzkin, please.
Oddly, it came out with a very, very similar number for absolutely different reasons. But I thought the dome for sure is not worth $40 a square foot. There's no way in the world. But I remember it being much, it's in the 20s somewhere. It's not valueless, but it's not anything close to maybe it's the retail space of 27. But I took some other deductions and got the EGI at about over $500,000 less and capped it out and came out to almost the same number. So I don't know that we should, I will add, again, given my bottom line still the same for different reasons, I don't agree plussing up the build out to 110. That's for cold dark shell. We did it in the last case and that's probably legitimate. 90 is a goodly amount for a second or third generation space. I've been in that building many times. It's not decrepit. Well, I haven't been in the last 5 years, but it's not decrepit. But the bottom line's the bottom line.
Okay. Where's everybody else?
Excuse me, are you?
Okay? Mr. Yates.
Ken, are you okay with the number?
I am for different reasons.
Yeah, I'm okay with that number too.
With what number, Mr. Yates?
Mr. Lawson's.
Okay. All right. Mr. Penaranda, anything different?
No, I'm okay with it. I was trying to see making the reduction properly, going through all the numbers because, the allowances are going to change also based on the square footage. So I'm not really sure if that's.
I was trying to do it easy.
Right, I understand. But I think it would take longer to go through the whole worksheet,
Okay, so are you, Mr. Panorama, then are you okay then with the number?
I'm not comfortable with the number, to be honest, because I'm not sure if that's really the correct number based on just one change. I think we would have to go through the whole worksheet to really come up with that if we're going to deduct that space.
All right, Mr. Matzkin, where are you?
Yeah, it seems like a huge, let me revise and extend my comments. It seems like a huge based on similar buildings that we see around the county that are being appealed. The revised department number is 11% less than the 2021 valuation, which is a little bit higher than we see from a lot of appellants. And again, we only know appellants. We don't know everybody else who's not appealing. And now if it goes down some more, it gets to be 20% or more discount from 2021 assessment. And I'm not sure that something that dramatic has happened in this building. That's a huge percentage number from one year to another with a steady state, a weak building for sure. I mean, they got lots of space sitting idle, but as I'm thinking about it, as I'm talking, all of a sudden I'm not so comfortable with the number that I came up with, and for different reasons, Barnes Lawson came up with.
Right, but you can look at though, that the original assessment, the NOI, was clearly overstated.
Ken, the reason I went
Mr.
with
Lawson.
yeah, I'm sorry. I know you got to recognize this. Ken, the reason I went with the 110 is the cost of demo of the dome.
Oh, yeah, I don't think it's valueless. We can, you know, politely agree.
I think.
Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right. I don't know.
Okay, Mr. Yates?
Ken, I went along with that number, and we do, as you point out very often, we assess annually. Right now, that dome is not leasable. It has not been leasable. It has the value of it other than space here. If they able to rent it at $10 a square foot in the future, yes. But right now, it is not there's no generation of revenue.
Well, they're asking too much money for it, of course.
Well, but I mean, look, we ask money for houses all the time and people come in with their offers or another building. I don't think there's value to that dome. And if someone turned around and leased it, yes, versus trying to demo it and redo it, which maybe it can be done. I don't know, but it would be expensive.
So what's your bottom line?
I'm going back with what Barnes had.
Yeah.
We'll look at it again. God willing, in 2 years they've got it leased under new construction, or someone wants to do a public service.
Yeah, Ken, also it was specifically built for the museum.
Yeah.
Right.
I've watched the things that I was in there once a month.
Yeah.
No, and I would agree. I think there's definitely physical and functional obsolescence to it. You know, just for the sloping of the floor alone. Who else are you going to put in there?
There's no value right now.
Well, it's something special. I mean, the only way they're going to get something, I mean, plussing up the floor with this dome. I mean, what kind of office space is it? It's crazy. Under no circumstances is it an office rent. But it's only 10,000 plus square feet out of it's 3% of the building or something. Isn't it 33,000 square feet or something?
And that's all we're trying to, all he's suggesting is adjusting it too.
It's not a big-
Okay, Mr. Lawson, I think you've got votes, so if you'd like to make a motion.
Yeah. Feel free.
Okay, I'll go ahead and make a motion. We reduce the assessment to $89,223,000 based upon deletion of the dome as rentable area at $40 a square foot and increasing the TI at the 110 square foot value based upon extraordinary demo costs of the dome.
Okay, do you have a second? Mr.
I'll second.
Yates, okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
All right, it's 3-2, and that's without Mr. Matskin and Mr. Penaranda. The motion carries. The assessment is reduced to $89,223,000 even. That's removing the square footage of the dome area and increasing the TI to $110 a square foot. Thank you. Okay, bringing up the final case on the agenda is RPC 18004-065 at 2100 Clarendon Boulevard. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Madam Chairwoman, there's been a settlement offer submitted on this case, and it's been executed.
It has been?
It has been.
I thought they were settled that one.
All righty. Then that is stricken from the docket then.
Is this building going to disappear all of a sudden?
Rosa, can you confirm, please? Because yesterday I don't think it was received.
I haven't gotten anything signed. No.
I believe it has been submitted, and can you give me a minute to just look and confirm?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you sign that, Derek?
Call Marilyn Minor.
I mean, if it's for the revision amount, then the department doesn't have any issue with that.
And I guess it might save some time if the board wants to just adopt the department's amount and make it a hearing. That would be fine with us as well. It might save some time for the board.
Well, the problem is to just accept it. It needs to be heard because it doesn't mean if it goes before the board that the board accepts it. The board could make a decision to accept the original.
Can we continue for a week, subject to receiving the signed document?
Can we do abbreviated arguments now and come and see where the appellant and department come to?
Well, let's give her a second to get this.
I'm gonna just, would the board like to take a 5-minute break?
Sure, it's 10:27. Why don't we take 5 minutes and we'll come back and wrap up this last case then, one way or another.
And I believe I found an email, so this may be it. So the signed settlement was sent to the county on September 9th, last Friday at 2:51 p.m.
Signed.
What time was that? I'm sorry, September what?
September 9th, last Friday at 2:51 p.m.
Send it Arlene.
And would that go to Mr.
This one-
Peralta?
This went to Rosa.
To Rosa?
Yeah,
Who sent it, Marilyn or Arlene?
it was Marilyn.
Okay, let me look it up. Can you just resend it to me then? So I won't take much time looking this up.
Jordan, if you have it handy, would you send it to Rosa?
Yeah, I can forward it to Rosa. And
It's not done till you guys sign, yeah? Or no, unilateral?
okay, Rosa, I just forwarded that to you.
It's just their signature required.
Okay, once Rosa can confirm receipt.
Email.
This will try to scan it over.
You know, I think part of the issue, Rosa, maybe the owners call the building 2200 Clarendon, and the county calls the building 2100 Clarendon.
She's got the document. Okay, Mary, it's confirmed. I got the document.
You got it? Okay, all right. Well, if the county's in receipt of it, then that is stricken from the agenda. All right, that completes the business for today.
Thank you, everyone, for
Any
your
other
time.
business that we need to talk about?
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
Evan.
No? Okay, if the board members just stay for a second, just to talk about next week. Otherwise, we are good. All right, this meeting stands adjourned. Then at 10:29, we will re-adjourn next Tuesday, the 20th at 9 a.m. Thank you. All right, Rosa, you can stop recording.